There is a spot in your yard right now that you have stopped trying to fix. You know the one, under the large oak that has been there since before you moved in, against the north wall of the house where direct sunlight never reaches from April through October. That dark corridor between your fence and your neighbor's garage where you have planted 4 different things in the last 6 years and watched every single one of them die. You have tried hostas and watched them burn. You have tried impatiens and replaced them every single spring. You have tried ferns that struggled through one season and never came back. You may have even tried leaving it bare and mulching it heavily, which solved the ugly problem temporarily but never actually fixed it. Here is what nobody at the garden center ever told you, and what most gardening content still gets wrong. Deep shade is not a problem to solve with more effort. It is a plant matching problem. And the reason everything you have tried has either died or disappointed you is not that you are a bad gardener. It is that you were given plants designed for different conditions and told to make them work in yours. There are 9 perennials that were not simply adapted to deep shade over time. They evolved specifically for it. Their leaf structure, their root architecture, their reproductive strategy, every biological system they have is calibrated for low-light environments. When you put them in deep shade, you are not asking them to survive difficult conditions. You are putting them exactly where they want to be. And here is the part that changes everything. Most of these plants are completely unavailable at major garden centers. The big box stores and the chain nurseries stock what sells in full sun because full sun plants photograph well on tags, look spectacular on display benches, and move quickly. The shade plants that actually perform in deep shade are sitting at independent nurseries, native plant societies, and specialty mail-order growers while your problem spots sit there empty and frustrating. After this video, that changes. Before we get to plant number 1, I want you to drop a comment right now and tell me 2 things. Tell me what state you are gardening in, and tell me what you have already tried in your worst shaded spot and what happened. I read every single comment, and I want to build a real picture of how many American gardeners are dealing with this exact problem right now, because I suspect the answer is most of them. Perennial number 1, Solomon seal. If you have never heard of Solomon seal, you are about to understand why it is one of the most significant gaps in mainstream American gardening content. Because this plant does something in deep shade that no other perennial on this list can replicate. And it does it in conditions that would stop most other plants completely. Solomon seal, botanically known as Polygonatum, produces arching stems that grow 2 to 4 feet long depending on the variety, curving gracefully outward and downward in a movement that looks almost architectural. Along the underside of those stems, small white bell-shaped flowers hang in pairs in late spring, subtle and elegant rather than showy, followed by dark blue-black berries in fall that birds consume readily through autumn. But the flower is not the reason to grow this plant. The reason to grow Solomon seal is the stem. That arching, horizontal sweep of growth creates a layered canopy effect at mid-height in a shade garden that no upright plant can provide. It fills the vertical middle space between ground-level plants and taller shrubs with a movement and elegance that makes a shaded area look intentionally designed rather than accidentally abandoned. And it handles deep shade in a way that requires an explanation, because understanding why it works tells you everything about where to place it. Most plants capture light through the top surface of their leaves. In deep shade, that surface receives almost no direct light, which means photosynthesis slows and the plant struggles. Solomon seal evolved on forest floors where light arrives filtered, diffused, and indirect for the entire growing season. Its leaves are positioned along the stem horizontally, angled to capture the maximum possible amount of diffuse light rather than direct light. The leaf structure itself contains higher concentrations of chlorophyll than most sun plants, allowing it to process what little light is available with exceptional efficiency. It is not simply tolerating low light. It has superior equipment for it. The variegated variety, Polygonatum odoratum variegatum, adds a clean white margin to each leaf that catches and reflects whatever ambient light exists in a shaded area, making the plant appear to glow softly in conditions where other plants simply disappear into the dark. This is the variety I would recommend to anyone planting their first shade border, because the visual impact it creates in a dark spot is genuinely remarkable. For those of you in the south, in zones 7 through 9 where summer heat layers on top of shade stress and eliminates most shade plants by August, pay close attention to this one. Solomon's seal goes summer dormant as heat builds. The top growth yellows and declines by midsummer in warm climates and disappears entirely, but the rhizome underground is completely alive and healthy. It returns the following spring exactly on schedule. Planted alongside hostas or ferns whose foliage expands through summer to cover the space it vacates. Solomon's seal handles the spring display. Your summer plants take over seamlessly. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. It grows in full shade, partial shade, and anywhere in between. Moist, humus-rich soil is ideal, but it tolerates dry shade under established trees better than almost any other plant on this list, which makes it one of the most valuable options for the difficult root competition zone under large mature trees. The variety Great Stella produces stems up to 5 feet long, dramatic enough to anchor a large shaded area with genuine structural presence. Kinksmeat variegated has bolder, more pronounced white margins on dark green leaves, and stays more compact at 18 to 24 inches, ideal for smaller shade gardens or container planting in shaded spots. The one mistake most gardeners make with Solomon's seal is dividing it too early. This plant takes 3 full years to reach its mature arching form. A freshly planted division looks modest and upright for the first season and beginning of the second. Many gardeners assume something is wrong and move it or replace it before it reaches the sweeping form that makes it spectacular. Leave it completely undisturbed for 3 years. By year 3, the arching character is fully developed, and you will understand immediately why experienced shade gardeners consider this one of the essential plants in any serious planting. Perennial number 2, Pulmonaria. Pulmonaria is the plant that earns its keep twice. Once in spring, when it delivers some of the earliest color available to the shade garden before most other perennials have broken dormancy, and continuously across every season through foliage that is unlike anything else available for low-light environments in American horticulture. The flowers appear in March and April in most American zones, sometimes while snow is still on the ground in zones 4 and 5, in clusters of tubular blooms that open pink and transition to blue as they mature on the same plant simultaneously. A single established clump carries both pink and blue flowers at the same time. The color shift is caused by a pH change within the flower tissue as it ages, a biological mechanism that is genuinely unusual among flowering perennials and creates a two-tone display from one plant without any human intervention. But the flowers are the secondary reason to grow Pulmonaria. The primary reason is the foliage. The leaves are covered in silver-white spots on dark green backgrounds in most varieties, giving the plant a silvery, almost luminous quality that brightens deep shade the way almost no other foliage plant can. In a dark corner where most plants simply absorb what little light exists, Pulmonaria reflects it back outward. The visual effect in a shaded garden is that this plant appears to generate its own light source. The silver spots are not cosmetic, they are functional. The pale tissue in the spots contains reduced chlorophyll and appears lighter because it reflects more light rather than absorbing it. This is an adaptation to the dappled, irregular light of forest understory environments where light arrives in brief, shifting patches throughout the day. The spotted leaf pattern maximizes light capture across the entire leaf surface as those patches move. Because different portions of the leaf are optimized for different light angles and intensities. For variety selection, Trevi Fountain produces the most heavily silver-spotted leaves of any Pulmonaria widely available in the American market, with leaves that are more silver than green at peak development. It stays 12 to 15 inches tall and spreads steadily into a dense, weed-suppressing ground cover over 3 to 4 seasons. Diana Claire has nearly solid silver foliage with just a fine dark green edge, one of the most dramatically silver-leaved perennials available in any light condition, not just shade. And Raspberry Splash offers the speckled silver foliage combined with raspberry pink flowers that hold their color longer than most varieties before transitioning to blue. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8. Moist, humus-rich soil that drains well. Full shade to light shade. Consistent moisture through the growing season, particularly through summer in zones 6 through 8 where heat buildup can stress the foliage if soil dries out completely between waterings. Here is what most gardening content never tells you about Pulmonaria, and it is the care instruction that makes the difference between a plant that looks spectacular all season and one that looks tired and mildewed by July. After flowering ends in May, cut the entire plant back to the ground. Every leaf, every stem, down to an inch from the soil level. It looks severe for about 10 days. Then completely fresh, clean, unblemished new foliage emerges from the base and carries the plant through the rest of the growing season looking as good as it did in April. Skip that cutback and you get foliage that accumulates fungal spotting and looks progressively worse through summer. The timing of that one cut determines the entire summer appearance of this plant. Perennial number 3, Epimedium. This is the plant I want every gardener dealing with dry shade under established trees to stop the video for right now and write down. Because the problem of dry shade under tree roots is one of the most common and most genuinely difficult gardening challenges in American yards, and most of the solutions offered for it simply do not work in those conditions. Epimedium does. Reliably, year after year, in conditions that defeat plants specifically marketed as dry shade tolerant. Epimedium, commonly called barrenwort or bishop's hat, produces small, delicate flowers in early spring in yellow, white, pink, purple, and bicolor combinations depending on variety. The flowers nod on wiry stems above the foliage and have an almost orchid-like quality, 4 petals surrounding 4 inner petals that form a hood shape. They are subtle rather than showy. But they arrive in April when subtle beauty in a garden spot that produces nothing else most of the year is more welcome than dramatic flowers elsewhere. The foliage that follows is the real performance. Heart-shaped leaves on wiry stems that emerge red-bronze in spring, mature to fresh green through summer, and transition to deep burgundy red in fall with the kind of color intensity usually associated with maples and dogwoods rather than ground cover perennials. In zones 6 through 9, most Epimedium varieties hold their foliage through winter, providing green or burgundy ground coverage when every other plant in the shaded area has gone dormant. But here is the biological fact that separates Epimedium from every other dry shade plant you have ever been recommended. The root system of an established Epimedium is composed of dense, interlocking rhizomes that form a nearly impenetrable mat below the soil surface. This mat creates a physical barrier against competing tree roots that most other plants cannot maintain in the long-term competition for soil moisture and nutrients under established trees. Epimedium does not simply tolerate the competition. It establishes itself within it and holds that space permanently. After 3 years in a dry shade location under a large tree where competing surface roots are dense and aggressive, an established Epimedium colony is effectively unchallengeable by those roots because its own root structure occupies the same layer of soil with equal density. That is why it succeeds in a spot where plants with less developed root architecture slowly starve out and decline over several seasons. For variety selection, Epimedium rubrum produces the most vivid red-tinted spring foliage and holds its fall color into December in zone 6 and warmer. It reaches 12 to 15 inches and spreads to form dense colonies over several years. Epimedium X versicolor sulphureum has soft yellow flowers that appear in early spring before the leaves emerge in foliage that holds well through winter in all but the coldest zones. And Epimedium grandiflorum, Rose Queen, produces larger flowers than most species in a clear rose pink. that is the most visually impactful variety for spring flower display. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9. Dry to moist, well-draining soil. Full shade to partial shade. Once established, truly drought-tolerant in a way that almost no other shade perennial can claim honestly. The mistake that delays Epimedium's performance more than any other is planting it in soil that has not been amended before planting. Under established trees where dry shade is the condition, the existing soil is typically dense, root-filled, nutrient-depleted, and structurally compacted. Epimedium establishes faster and performs better in its critical first 2 seasons when the planting area has been amended with generous compost, and the existing tree roots have been worked around rather than cut. 3-inch deep planting holes filled with amended mix give the Epimedium roots a favorable start before they encounter the competition they will ultimately manage successfully. Give it 2 seasons before judging it. In year 3, you will have a planting that other gardeners ask about by name because almost no one recognizes it, and almost everyone is impressed by what it is doing in conditions they assumed nothing could handle. If you are finding this useful and you are not subscribed to this channel yet, I want to ask you something directly. How long have you been dealing with that shaded problem spot? A year? 3 years? 5 years? This information has been available the whole time. It just was not reaching you. Subscribe right now so that the next time a specific gardening problem has a specific solution, that solution finds you before you spend another season staring at a bare patch and wondering what to try next. Hit subscribe and hit the notification bell. That is the only thing standing between you and this information finding you every single week. Perennial number 4, Astilbe. Most gardeners who have grown Astilbe in the ground have experienced the disappointment of watching the flower plumes arrive smaller than expected, last less time than advertised, and decline earlier than they should in a hot summer. And most of those gardeners concluded that Astilbe is a difficult, finicky plant that requires more attention than it is worth. They were not wrong about the performance. They were wrong about the cause. Astilbe underperforms in the ground because in the ground, you cannot control the one variable that determines everything about its quality, moisture consistency. Astilbe needs consistently moist soil through the entire growing season. Not wet, not waterlogged, consistently moist. In most American garden beds, even heavily amended ones, soil moisture fluctuates with rainfall patterns, evaporation rates, and competing root systems in ways that create repeated dry periods between waterings. Each dry period shortens the bloom and diminishes the plume size. The cumulative effect across a summer season is a plant that looks like a pale version of what the tag promised. But the real point about Astilbe in the shade garden is what it contributes to a complete planting, because Astilbe delivers the one thing that most shade perennials do not: vertical drama. The feathery plumes rise 18 inches to 4 feet above the foliage depending on variety, creating genuine vertical structure in a planting layer that tends toward horizontal spreading ground covers and low mounding plants. In a well-designed shade garden, Astilbe is the plant that makes everything else around it look intentional by adding that vertical element. The plume colors available today go significantly beyond the white and pink that most gardeners associate with Astilbe. Fennel produces deep, saturated red plumes on dark bronze foliage, one of the most dramatic color combinations available in any shade plant at any price point. Vision in red is a more recently developed variety with intense crimson plumes that hold their color through heat better than older red varieties. Visions in white offers pure, clean white plumes that appear almost luminous in deep shade, contrasting beautifully against the dark foliage of neighboring hostas or heuchera. And peach blossom, which has been in American gardens for decades and remains one of the most reliable performers, produces soft salmon pink plumes that combine with almost any other color in the shade garden palette. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8, partial to full shade. Moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil. Consistent moisture through the growing season, particularly through July and August in zones 6 through 8. The critical care instruction for Astilbe that most gardeners never receive is this: Do not cut the spent plumes immediately after flowering ends. Left standing through fall, the dried plumes transition to warm russet and bronze tones that provide genuine ornamental interest into November. They catch frost beautifully. They hold their form through wind, and they give the fall shade garden a kind of quiet elegance that bare cut stems never provide. Cut them back in late fall or early spring. Either timing works equally well, but not in August when they are just finishing bloom and the season still has months to contribute. Perennial number 5, Toad Lily. Stop here for a moment, because plant number 5 is the reason serious shade gardeners stay in the hobby through the most challenging seasons. This is the plant that solves the problem that the rest of this list cannot fully address, the problem of what blooms in your shade garden in October when everything else has finished, when the perennial season is winding down, and every other flower in your yard has gone to seed or frost. Toad lily, botanically Trichoetes, produces flowers so unusual and so intricate that the first time most people see them in bloom, they assume they are looking at an exotic orchid that someone has placed in the garden as a joke. The flowers are small and face upward on arching stems, white or pale lilac covered in dark purple spots, with a central structure of stamens and pistils that extends upward from the throat in a column that looks genuinely architectural at close range. They are not subtle, they are exotic, and they produce these flowers from September through hard frost, which in most American zones means they are blooming in October and sometimes into November when your garden desperately needs something alive. The spotted pattern on the petals gives the plant its common name, but the biological function of those spots goes beyond aesthetics. The markings serve as nectar guides for pollinators, directing them toward the flower center with precision. Late-season bees, the native species that are still active in October when honeybees have largely retreated, work toad lily flowers consistently through their entire bloom period. In a season when late pollinator food is critically scarce, this plant provides it reliably. The foliage is also worth noting. The leaves clasp the stem directly, alternating up the length of each arching cane in a bamboo-like pattern that makes the plant architecturally interesting, even before flowering begins in August and September. The stems arch outward from the crown in a graceful, slightly weeping pattern at 2 to 3 feet tall, creating that same mid-height layered effect in the shade garden that Solomon's seal provides in spring, but delivering it in the fall season when the garden needs structural interest most. For variety selection, Miyazaki is the most widely available and most reliable performer across the broadest range of American zones, white petals with purple spotting on stems that reach 30 inches. Cinnamon produces larger, more open flowers with bolder spotting and slightly more vigorous growth. Empress produces white flowers with a faint lilac flush and cleaner, less heavily spotted petals for gardeners who want the exotic form in a more restrained color palette. And for the Pacific Northwest, where cool, moist conditions in fall favor toad lily bloom timing perfectly, Lightning Strike has golden variegated foliage that adds interest through the entire season before flowering. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9, partial to full shade, moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil, consistent moisture, particularly in zones 7 through 9 where summer heat can cause stress that reduces fall bloom if the plant goes into its flowering period depleted. The one care instruction most people get wrong with toad lily is site selection based on light. Because this plant blooms in fall, gardeners often place it where they want fall interest without checking summer light conditions in that spot. Many areas that appear shaded in fall actually receive significant direct afternoon sun in midsummer when the sun angle is higher. Toad lily planted in a spot with hot afternoon summer sun will have burned, tattered foliage by the time it is ready to bloom in September. Always observe a planting site through July and August before committing toad lily to it. Morning sun and afternoon shade in zones 6 through 9, or filtered shade throughout the day in all zones, gives you the clean, healthy foliage that makes the fall flower display as impressive as the plant is capable of. I want to ask you something right now, and I want a genuine answer in the comments. Before this video, had you ever heard of toad lily? Had you ever seen it growing anywhere? I ask because this plant has been available through specialty nurseries for decades, and it is one of the most genuinely spectacular fall shade perennials in American horticulture, and the vast majority of American gardeners have never encountered it once. Drop your answer below because I want to know how big that gap actually is between what is available and what people know about. Perennial number 6, Hosta. I am going to say something about hostas that most gardening content carefully avoids, because acknowledging it means acknowledging that millions of American gardeners have been growing hostas incorrectly for years, and nobody in the industry has much incentive to tell them. Hostas are not hard to grow, but they are specific about one condition that most people assume is flexible when it is not. And when that condition is wrong, every hosta you have ever grown looked like a pale, struggling version of what it was capable of. That condition is moisture consistency in July and August. This is when hostas are building the energy reserves that determine the following year's leaf size, color intensity, and overall vigor. A hosta that experiences 2 to 3 dry periods during these 6 weeks enters the following season with diminished capacity that shows up as smaller leaves, less saturated color, and reduced overall fullness. Year after year of summer moisture stress produces hostas that look progressively less impressive despite appearing otherwise healthy, and gardeners assume the plant is simply aging out or not performing as described, when the actual cause is entirely correctable. That explanation out of the way, let me tell you what hostas can do in deep shade when that moisture condition is correctly managed, because the reality is more impressive than most people have experienced. Some in substance produces single leaves up to 24 inches across that glow chartreuse gold in shade with a presence that makes it unmistakable from across a yard. One mature clump of some in substance is a garden feature, not a ground cover. Blue Angel reaches 4 feet tall and 5 feet wide, with deeply textured powder blue leaves that create a bold, almost architectural presence in a large shaded area. And the variety Halcyon, smaller and more refined at 12 inches tall, produces the truest, most powder blue foliage of any hosta widely available in the American market, with a slug resistance notably higher than most blue-leaved varieties. The variety First Frost deserves specific attention for anyone dealing with deep shade under large trees where morning light is minimal. Its blue-green leaves with irregular yellow-gold margins reflect available light in a way that brightens the entire surrounding area, functioning as a living light source in the same way Pulmonaria does, but at a much larger scale. It has received the American Hosta Growers Association Hosta of the Year award, which is the most reliable performance indicator in the variety selection process for this genus. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, full shade to partial shade, moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil, consistent moisture through July and August, protection from hot afternoon sun in zones 7 through 9. Division is the care practice that keeps hostas performing at peak capacity, and that most gardeners either do too infrequently or avoid entirely. A hosta clump that has not been divided in 6 or more years has a crowded center that produces smaller leaves than the outer edges, because the interior crown sections are competing for soil moisture and nutrients with no room to expand. Divide in early spring when the leaves are just emerging as tightly rolled spikes, before full leaf expansion. Use a sharp spade to separate the crown into sections of 3 to 5 crowns each. Replant immediately with amended soil and consistent moisture through the establishment period. Each division returns to full-sized leaf production within 1 full growing season. Skip division for too long, and you are watching a spectacular plant perform at 60% of what it is capable of. Perennial number 7, Heuchera. This is where I want to address something specific to the gardeners watching who have been frustrated with color in their shade garden. Not the flower color that comes and goes over a few weeks, but sustained, all-season color from a plant that earns its space every single day from April through November without ever going through an ugly phase. Heuchera, the coral bells, delivers that in colors that have no parallel anywhere in the shade garden. Not pale imitations of the colors you get in full sun. Genuinely saturated, distinctive colors that would be remarkable in any light condition and are extraordinary in shade. The reason Heuchera color works so powerfully in shade involves a pigment group called anthocyanins. These are the compounds responsible for the burgundy, purple, amber, and bronze tones in Heuchera foliage. In shade conditions, rather than simply being less visible as they would be in lower light conditions in full sun plants, anthocyanin-rich foliage actually appears more saturated in diffuse light because the absence of direct sun eliminates the bleaching effect that reduces color intensity in exposed foliage. The deep burgundy of Pallas purple or the near black of obsidian appears darker, richer, and more saturated in shade than it does in full sun. Shade enhances Heuchera color. It does not diminish it. Pallas purple produces deep burgundy purple leaves that appear almost black in certain light angles, with small white flowers that contrast beautifully against the dark foliage in early summer. Obsidian takes that color further, producing the darkest foliage of any Heuchera widely available, nearly black with a metallic sheen that creates a visual anchor in any shade planting. Georgia peach offers warm copper-amber tones that shift toward pink-orange as temperatures cool in fall, a color that has no equivalent in any other shade perennial. Caramel produces similar warm amber tones with a slightly looser, more relaxed growth habit that works well for naturalizing. And lime Ricky offers the opposite end of the palette, electric chartreuse foliage that illuminates dark corners with a brightness that feels almost artificial, but is entirely natural and sustained from spring through frost. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9, partial to full shade, well-draining, humus-rich soil, consistent moisture without standing water. In zones 7 through 9, morning sun only, afternoon shade essential for preventing the foliage bleaching that eliminates Heuchera's primary value proposition. The single most important care instruction for Heuchera in a container or garden bed is top-dressing the crown annually. Heuchera crowns rise above the soil surface progressively over years as the plant grows upward from the base. An exposed crown is a crown vulnerable to frost heave in cold zones and drought stress in warm ones. Every spring, before significant growth begins, work fresh potting mix or compost gently around the base of the plant to cover any exposed crown tissue. That 1 5-minute task per plant per year is the difference between Heuchera that performs beautifully for a decade and Heuchera that slowly declines and looks progressively worse without any obvious cause. This channel exists specifically to deliver the information that the difference between a struggling plant and a thriving plant comes down to. Not the plant you choose, but the specific knowledge about that plant that nobody gives you when you buy it. If that kind of specific, mechanism-based, honest information is what you have been looking for, subscribe right now. This is what this channel delivers every single week. Not beautiful photography of plants in ideal conditions, but the actual knowledge that determines whether those plants perform in your actual yard. Subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. Every video we put out is built around exactly this level of specificity. Perennial number 8, hellebore. Every plant on this list has surprised gardeners who encountered it for the first time. None of them have produced the specific kind of reaction that hellebore produces, which is not simply surprise but a kind of disbelief, because this plant is doing something that appears to contradict a fundamental rule of how plants are supposed to behave. Hellebore blooms in February, not March, not the first week of April when the snowdrops appear and the earliest crocuses push through. February, sometimes January in zone 7 and warmer, sometimes while snow is actively falling in zones 5 and 6. The flowers emerge from evergreen foliage that has been sitting through the coldest months looking as healthy as it did in October, and they open into flowers of such quiet, sophisticated beauty that gardeners who discover hellebore for the first time often describe it as the moment they began to think differently about what a garden could be in every season, not just the warm ones. The flowers are downward nodding, which means you need to either plant them on a slope where you look up at them from below, or kneel down and lift a flower gently to see its full face. That face contains a complexity of color and patterning that rewards close examination. The Ice and Roses series, one of the most reliably available in the American market, produces flowers in deep burgundy, soft pink, white, and near black with contrasting centers of yellow stamens that glow against the dark petals in the low light of a February afternoon. The biological mechanism that enables winter flowering is one of the most sophisticated cold weather adaptations in the perennial world. Hellebore flower buds develop in fall and are structurally complete before the first hard freeze. They do not open in cold temperatures, but they are not damaged by them, because the cellular structure of the flower tissue contains compounds that prevent ice crystal formation at temperatures that would destroy the cellular walls of most flowering plants. When temperatures moderate even briefly in late winter, the existing completed buds open immediately rather than waiting for sustained warmth, which is why hellebore appears to bloom during a brief February thaw and seems to have come from nowhere. For variety selection beyond the Ice and Roses series, the Wedding Party series produces the most reliably double flowers available in the American hellebore market, with full, anemone-form blooms that hold their ornamental quality longer than single-flowered varieties. Penny's Pink delivers soft rose-pink flowers on an extremely vigorous plant that establishes faster than many hellebore varieties. And for gardeners in zones 3 through 5, where hellebore reliability can be inconsistent, the Brandywine series has been specifically selected for cold hardiness and produces the most dependable bloom display in the coldest American growing zones. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9, partial to full shade, moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil. Unlike most shade perennials, hellebore is genuinely drought-tolerant once fully established, typically by year 3, which makes it one of the most adaptable shade plants for variable moisture conditions. The care instruction that produces hellebore at its absolute best is one that most gardeners resist because it seems too aggressive for a plant they value. In late January or very early February, before the new flower buds fully open, cut every existing leaf on the plant down to the ground. Every single one. The plant looks completely bare for approximately 2 weeks. Then the existing flower buds, which were underneath the old foliage, stand fully revealed on clean stems above bare ground, and the combination of fresh flowers without the obstruction of old leathery leaves creates a display that is dramatically more impactful than hellebore grown without that winter cutback. Within 4 to 6 weeks of flowering, completely fresh new foliage emerges and carries the plant through the rest of the growing season looking clean and healthy rather than ragged and overgrown. Perennial number 9, Foam Flower. Foam flower, botanically Tiarella, is the most underplanted native shade perennial in American home gardening. Not slightly underplanted, dramatically, almost inexplicably underplanted, given that it solves the specific problem of ground-level coverage in deep shade with more elegance, more season-long interest, and more ecological value than almost anything else available in this country. Tiarella is native to the woodland understory of eastern North America, from the Appalachian Mountains north through New England and into Canada. It has been growing in exactly the kind of conditions that defeat most imported shade plants for thousands of years. When you plant it in deep shade under established American trees in the eastern 2/3 of the country, you are reuniting a plant with the ecosystem it evolved in. The performance difference between a plant working in its native conditions versus a plant managing imported conditions is immediately visible to anyone paying attention. The flowers emerge in April and May on slender upright spikes covered in tiny white to soft pink flowers that give the plant its common name. The individual flowers are minuscule, but the overall effect of a spike covered in them at this scale is genuinely delicate and beautiful in a way that the word foamy actually captures. They rise 6 to 10 inches above the foliage in a cloud of color that arrives earlier than almost any other shade perennial flower, and provides the spring shade garden with a softness and freshness that makes the whole planting feel newly alive. But the foliage is where Tiarella earns its year-round value. The leaves are deeply lobed and heart-shaped, similar in form to a coral bell's leaf, but with a pattern of dark burgundy markings along the veins that creates a bold, graphic quality at the level of individual leaves. Looking down at an established foam flower planting in summer is like looking at a mosaic floor of green and burgundy that covers the soil completely and suppresses weeds with the kind of total effectiveness usually associated with aggressive spreaders. Tiarella achieves this coverage through a gentle, steady outward expansion by surface runners rather than aggressive rhizomatous spread, which means it fills in as a ground cover without ever becoming the kind of problem that requires containment or removal. The fall foliage color on many varieties rivals that of trees and shrubs. In zones 5 through 7 particularly, Tiarella leaves turn deep burgundy red as temperatures drop in October, providing a ground-level fall color display in the shade garden at exactly the moment when fall color is most sought after and most appreciated. For variety selection, running tapestry produces the most vivid dark vein patterning of any widely available Tiarella variety and spreads by runners to fill in ground cover areas faster than clumping varieties. Spring Symphony is a compact clumping variety with soft pink flowers, perfect for smaller shade gardens, where the spreading habit of runner-producing varieties would require management. Ninja produces bold, deeply cut leaves with very dark burgundy markings that create the most dramatic foliage effect available in the genus, and it holds its color through summer heat better than most varieties in zones 6 through 8. And Sugar and Spice, a hybrid between Tiarella and Heuchera, combines the spreading habit of foam flower with coral bell's foliage colors in a plant that has the ecological benefits of a native with the visual range of a cultivated hybrid. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, full shade to partial shade, moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil, moderate drought tolerance once established, particularly in the runner-producing spreading varieties whose surface runners can access moisture from a wider soil area than compact clumping plants. The mistake that prevents most gardeners from getting the ground cover performance foam flower is capable of is planting it at the spacing suggested on the nursery tag. Tags typically recommend 12 to 18-inch spacing. For a ground cover application where you want coverage within 2 seasons, plant spreading varieties at 10 to 12 inches and clumping varieties at 8 to 10 inches. The denser initial planting closes the soil gaps faster, suppresses weeds through the first 2 critical establishment seasons, and creates the kind of complete lush coverage that makes a shaded area look intentionally planted by year 2 rather than sparsely dotted with isolated individual plants. Now I want to stop before the final section of this video and ask you to do something that will directly improve the quality of this channel for every gardener watching. Out of the 9 plants we have covered, Solomon's seal, Pulmonaria, Epimedium, Astilbe, toad lily, hosta, heuchera, hellebore, and foam flower, tell me in the comments which 2 you are planting this season, and tell me your USDA zone when you answer. And here is the second question I want you to answer honestly. Before this video, how many of these 9 plants had you heard of? All 9, 5 or 6, 2 or 3? I want to know how much of this information was genuinely new because the answer tells me something important about where the biggest gaps in available gardening information actually are. Drop both answers below. I read every comment and I respond to as many as I can. The shade garden system. You can plant every one of these 9 perennials correctly, choose the right variety, match it to the right zone, give it the right soil. You can do all of that accurately and still end up with a collection of individual plants that looks assembled rather than designed. A shade garden that stops people and makes them ask who planted it is not just a collection of correct plant choices. It is a layered system where each plant occupies a specific role in the vertical structure, the seasonal calendar, and the color and texture composition of the whole. Here is how to build that system with the plants from this list. The ground level. Foamflower and Pulmonaria cover the soil surface with a living carpet that suppresses weeds completely, reflects available light upward from their silvered and patterned foliage, and provides the earliest spring color of anything in a shade planting. Plant them densely. Let them connect. The spaces between individual plants should be closed within 2 seasons. A bare soil surface in a shade garden is an invitation for weeds that is significantly harder to close than it looks when you are standing over it with fresh mulch in April. The mid-height layer. Epimedium, Heuchera, and Hosta occupy the 12-inch to 24-inch height range and provide the sustained foliage color and texture that makes a shade garden interesting across every season. Vary the foliage color deliberately. A burgundy Heuchera next to a chartreuse Hosta next to a silver-spotted Epimedium creates a color composition at the mid-height level that reads clearly from a distance and rewards close examination. Repeat color groupings across the bed rather than concentrating each variety in one location. Repetition creates visual rhythm. One isolated burgundy Heuchera looks like an accident. 3 burgundy Heucheras distributed through the planting looks like a decision. The vertical layer. Solomon's seal in spring and Astilbe in early summer provide the arching and upright vertical elements that give the planting structure and prevent it from looking flat. Place Solomon's seal at the back or along the edges, where its long arching stems can sweep outward without covering smaller plants. Place Astilbe in groups of 3 or 5 where the vertical plumes create genuine upright presence against the horizontal foliage of everything around them. The seasonal calendar. This is where the 9 plants justify themselves as a system rather than a list. Hellebore and Pulmonaria flower in February through April before most of the garden wakes up. Foamflower, Solomon's seal, and Epimedium carry spring from April through May. Astilbe and Heuchera in flower carry early summer. Hosta provides the summer anchor through July and August. And toad lily delivers fall color from September through hard frost at a moment, when every other flower in most shade gardens has been finished for weeks. From February to November, 9 months of something alive and interesting in a spot where you previously had nothing. That is not gardening, that is a system. For zones 3 and 4, your bloom calendar starts in April rather than February, and your toad lily window may close with the first October frost rather than extending into November. Choose cold-hardy hellebore varieties from the Brandywine series. Plant Solomon's seal and foamflower in your most protected locations in the first season to allow establishment before hard winter. Everything else on this list is fully hardy in your zones without special treatment. For zones 7 through 9, the summer dormancy of Solomon's seal and bleeding heart creates temporary gaps in your planting that need deliberate coverage. Plan Astilbe and Hosta placement specifically to fill those gaps as spring ephemerals go dormant. Your hellebore bloom may arrive as early as December and extend through March. Your toad lily may continue into November. Use the longer growing season to allow faster establishment of slower plants like Epimedium and toad lily. Soil preparation for shade. The single most common reason shade perennials underperform in American yards is not the plants chosen and not the light level. It is the soil under established trees where most deep shade exists. Soil under large trees has been depleted by decades of root competition, compressed by years of foot traffic and rain impact on bare ground, and structurally degraded by the absence of the organic matter cycling that healthy soil requires. Planting into that soil without amendment is asking plants to establish in conditions significantly worse than the light level alone already creates. Before planting any of the 9 plants on this list under established trees, work the top 8 to 10 inches of soil as thoroughly as the existing root system allows. Add 3 to 4 inches of compost worked into whatever depth you can reach between the roots. Where tree roots are too dense to work deeply, build up rather than dig down. a 2 to 3 inch raised layer of amended soil on top of the existing grade, contained by a simple timber or stone edge, provides enough root space for shade perennials to establish and produces significantly better results than forcing plants into unamended depleted soil at the existing grade. Water deeply and slowly immediately after planting, not a surface spray that runs off and does not penetrate. A slow, thorough soaking that reaches the full depth of the root ball and the surrounding amended area. For the first 4 to 6 weeks, water once weekly if rainfall does not provide it. After that establishment window closes, deep watering every 10 to 14 days during dry periods trains roots downward toward stored moisture, rather than keeping them near the surface where they are vulnerable to the heat, and drought that eliminates shade perennials more often than the shade itself does. Mulch 2 to 3 inches deep across the entire planting after everything is in the ground. Under trees where leaf litter is minimal due to the tree canopy intercepting it, shredded bark or leaf mold maintains soil moisture and moderates the soil temperature fluctuations that stress shallow-rooted shade perennials during summer. Leave a clear circle of unmulched soil around each plant crown. Mulch against the crown traps moisture that promotes exactly the rot and fungal conditions that shade perennials are already more susceptible to than sun plants. Year-round care calendar. Spring, February through April depending on zone. Cut hellebore foliage to the ground before or just as flowers open, as described in the hellebore section. This is the highest impact single maintenance task of the year for your shade garden. Remove winter-damaged foliage from heuchera and cut back any dead stems from Solomon seal before new growth emerges. Apply a 1-inch top dress of compost around every plant. This feeds the soil biology that feeds the plants through the slow-release mechanism that is more effective and more appropriate for shade perennials than any synthetic fertilizer. Do not apply synthetic high-nitrogen fertilizer to any plant on this list. The goal in a shade garden is not maximizing foliage growth at the expense of root development. Slow, steady, natural nutrient availability from compost produces the balanced growth that shade perennials need to develop the root systems that make them genuinely resilient after their establishment period. Early summer, May through June. Cut Pulmonaria back to the ground after flowering ends. This is the timing-sensitive task that most gardeners either miss or resist. Do it when the flowers are clearly finished and before summer heat builds significantly in your zone. Deadhead Astilbe if you want to maximize the chance of a partial second flush, or leave the plumes standing if the dried structure appeals to you more than the possibility of additional flowers. Summer, July, and August. Maintain consistent moisture for Astilbe and hostas during this critical period. If your zone is experiencing heat above 90 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods, water Astilbe and hostas specifically every 5 to 7 days regardless of rainfall, rather than relying on a fixed schedule. Everything else on this list manages July and August with less attention required. But these two plants are building next year's display during these specific weeks, and moisture consistency directly determines the quality of that display. Fall, September through November. Leave toad lily stems standing as long as they are actively blooming. Cut back Astilbe, hosta, and Pulmonaria after the first hard frost in zones 4 through 6. In zones 7 through 9, these may hold into December before frost cleanup is necessary. Leave hellebore foliage standing through fall and into January. It looks good through most of winter and provides crown insulation through fall and early winter frosts before the January cutback. Winter. Leave ornamental seed heads of Astilbe and hosta standing for as long as they provide structure and interest. In late January or early February, cut hellebore foliage before flowers open. Order any new plants you want to add in spring from mail or specialty nurseries in January and February. The selection of shade perennials available through mail order, particularly for toad lily, epimedium, and foam flower varieties, is significantly wider than what most local nurseries carry. The best varieties sell out by March. Final recommendation. If you have never planted a shade garden and you are standing in that problem spot wondering where to start, my completely honest recommendation is this. Start with 3 plants: hosta, heuchera, and foamflower. These 3 together give you immediate ground-level coverage from foamflower, mid-height foliage interest and color from heuchera, and bold structural presence from hosta. Plant them this spring. Let them establish through 1 full growing season. In fall, add Epimedium around the edges of your existing planting and let it overwinter and begin its establishment before spring. In spring of year 2, add Solomon's seal at the back and Astilbe in groups of 3 for vertical structure. By year 3, add toad lily for fall, Pulmonaria for early spring, and hellebore for winter. 3 years, 9 plants. A shade garden that produces something worth looking at in every single month of the year except the dead of winter, and in the dead of winter if your hellebore is performing. That spot that has defeated you for years does not need more effort. It needs these plants, planted once, and given the time to do what they were built to do. If you watched this entire video and found genuine value in every section we covered, the plant selections, the zone-specific guidance, the mechanisms that explain why each plant works, the system for combining them, and the year-round care calendar, then I want to ask you one final thing directly. Share this video with one person in your life who has a shaded problem spot they have given up on. One neighbor, one family member, one friend who has tried 3 different plants in that dark corner and lost them all. Send it to them right now, because this information will change how they approach that spot permanently. And if you are still not subscribed after everything we covered together today, I want to genuinely ask you why. This is free. It is built specifically for American gardeners who want honest, specific information that works in real conditions. It is here every single week. Hit subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. And drop a comment below telling me which of these 9 shade perennials you are planting first and what USDA zone you are gardening in. That spot in your yard that nothing would grow in, plant these. Give them time, and then walk past it next April and try to remember what it looked like before.